The dark story behind Waddesdon Manor begins on a cold morning in 1889, when a series of wooden crates arrived at the railway siding built specifically for the Rothschild estate. Inside them were fragments of carved limestone, each marked with inked numbers, shipped from France to be assembled on an English hilltop. The delivery was quiet, unannounced, but it signalled the next stage of a project that had already reshaped the surrounding countryside. By then, Waddesdon was no longer just a house under construction. It was becoming a curated world, engineered to evoke a past that had never existed on this land. The crates were transported by horse-drawn wagons up the artificial approach road that wound around the hill. Few visitors realised that the road itself had been rebuilt more than once to create a sense of anticipation. At the top, stonemasons waited for the arrival of these ornate pieces, destined for the manor's towers and window arches. Their placement required precision, because the building's French Renaissance style depended on harmony, symmetry, and the illusion of seamless age. Nothing about the process was spontaneous. Every block, every ridge, every decorative flourish had been planned months earlier, through correspondence between Ferdinand de Rothschild and his chosen architects. What the public saw was a grand silhouette rising above the fields. What the workers saw was the complexity behind it. Scaffolding anchored deep into the reshaped slopes, temporary tracks for hauling stone, and a network of sheds that served as on-site workshops. The estate was already consuming extraordinary resources, materials from across Europe, craftsmen brought for specific skills, and a financial structure that required careful balancing. Yet outwardly, Waddesdon appeared effortless, a place where wealth transformed itself into architectural certainty. As construction continued, a sense of purpose settled over the site. Every stone delivered to the top of the hill reinforced Ferdinand's intention to build not simply a residence, but a statement about lineage, culture, and permanence. The style he chose, deliberately foreign to English traditions, suggested a house that belonged to a deeper timeline. That illusion relied on hundreds of hidden decisions, reinforcements, mechanical systems, and structural concessions that were never meant to be noticed. Many estates of the period tried to impress with scale. Waddesdon impressed with control. From the first crate open that winter morning, it was clear that this house would not evolve organically like older country seats. It would be assembled with the precision of a museum installation. The choices made in those early years would shape not only the mansion's appearance, but its inner workings and the lives of everyone connected to it. Ferdinand de Rothschild's decision to build Waddesdon in the style of a French Renaissance chateau was more than an aesthetic preference. It was a declaration shaped by heritage, personal loss, and a desire to craft a controlled environment that reflected a curated version of identity. Born into one of Europe's most powerful banking dynasties, Ferdinand inherited both immense resources and a complex legacy. His family's story stretched across countries, markets, and political landscapes, yet he chose to root his English estate in a style associated with the Loire Valley centuries earlier. The choice raised quiet questions in his own time. Why import an architectural language belonging to another nation and another era? Why recreate, in rural Buckinghamshire, a world that had little connection to the land beneath it? The answer begins with Ferdinand's upbringing in Vienna, a city shaped by empire, formality, and a heightened sense of cultural expectation. His early life was filled with strict routines, multilingual tutors, and a family network that operated as much through symbolism as through finance. His later move to England brought stability, but it also created a gap between the world he inherited and the world in which he lived. Waddesdon became the bridge. The estate allowed him to express a lineage that was both European and cosmopolitan, yet distinct from the British aristocratic template. By evoking the Chateau of France, he aligned himself with a tradition of art collecting, architectural refinement, and intellectual sophistication, an implicit contrast to the more conservative English country house system. The first architectural sketches reveal this intention clearly. The steeply pitched roofs, elaborate gables, and symmetrical facades were modelled on designs by French architects of the 16th century, particularly those associated with the reigns of Francis I and Henry II. These buildings had once represented a merging of royal authority, humanist thought, and new technical knowledge. Ferdinand understood that symbolism well. To place such a structure in England was to signal a cultural allegiance that surpassed national borders. It was also a way of positioning himself within a lineage of collectors and patrons whose influence extended beyond the political realm. Yet translating that vision into reality required confronting the limitations of the landscape. The hill at Waddesdon did not resemble the riverbanks and valleys of the Loire. Its soil composition, drainage patterns, and natural slope challenged the idea of transplanting a French chateau directly onto it. Engineers had to modify the land extensively, levelling areas for foundations, stabilising embankments, and designing terraces that could support the structure's weight. Even the direction the house faced became a matter of deliberate calculation. Ferdinand wanted the approach to reveal the mansion gradually, as though emerging from a wooded past. Achieving that effect meant altering the natural contours and planting trees strategically to frame the future vistas. The architectural team, led by Gabriel Hippolyte Destailleur, a specialist in historical revival styles, adapted French precedent to English practicality. Stone was sourced from quarries capable of providing the right texture and colour, while certain structural components were reinforced using modern techniques that would never appear in the finished facade. Beneath the ornate exterior, steel beams and brickwork quietly supported the illusion of antiquity. The result was a hybrid creation, visually French, structurally English, and conceptually Rothschild. Inside the house, the vision took on another dimension. Ferdinand designed the interiors not as a home for daily domestic life, but as a setting for collections. Rooms were proportioned for tapestries, portraits, and display cabinets. Lighting was arranged to illuminate surfaces rather than accommodate human routines. Circulation paths guided visitors through sequences of curated spaces. The house functioned as a narrative, each room contributing to a larger story about prestige, continuity, and taste. In this context, the architectural shell became a kind of frame. Its French style signalled historical depth, while the contents asserted the family's modern reach. Ferdinand's journals, correspondence, and acquisition records reveal how meticulously he shaped that narrative. Every object was selected to reinforce a sense of cultural authority. He pursued items with proven provenance, connecting Waddesdon not only to French precedent, but to the wider networks of European art history. In doing so, he elevated the house from a private residence to an institution in its own right. But constructing and maintaining such a narrative required more than artistic judgment. It demanded a logistical system capable of supporting a world built on precision. The choice of French Renaissance architecture had practical implications that extended far beyond aesthetic coherence. The complex roofline, for instance, required extensive internal drainage channels to manage rainfall. The tall chimneys needed careful alignment with the heating infrastructure designed to warm the vast rooms. The high ceilings created challenges for both insulation and lighting. Each ornamental decision carried operational consequences, and for a house meant to host diplomatic gatherings, political figures, and members of the royal family, those systems had to function with absolute reliability. What seems at first like a purely stylistic decision becomes, on closer examination, a strategic expression of identity shaped through architecture. Waddesdon was designed to stand apart from English tradition while still operating within it. It was a statement made in stone, one that communicated belonging and difference simultaneously. The more one studies its form, the clearer it becomes that the house embodies a tension between visibility and concealment, the visibility of wealth and culture, and the concealment of the engineering, labour, and financial calculations that enabled it. This tension forms the foundation for understanding the deeper history of the estate. Every architectural choice carried implications for the landscape, for the workers who realised the design, and for the financial structures that had to sustain it long after its completion. And as the house rose on its carefully prepared hill, those implications began to shape the next layer of its story. The hill chosen for Waddesdon was never meant to support a structure of such weight or complexity. Before any stone facades or ornate turrets could be imagined, the land had to be reconfigured through a process closer to civil engineering than to country house construction. What visitors see today, a manor rising confidently above its surroundings, obscures the reality that the site was once uneven, unstable, and incapable of bearing the architecture Ferdinand de Rothschild envisioned. The transformation began with surveys carried out in the late 1870s, when teams of engineers mapped the slope, measured soil density, and calculated how much earth would need to be moved. The records indicate that the natural gradient was too irregular for the symmetrical plan Ferdinand required. Achieving that symmetry meant altering the hill itself. The first stage involved cutting into the earth to create a level platform for the foundations. This required thousands of cubic meters of soil to be excavated and redistributed. Contemporary accounts describe lines of carts moving continuously, their wheels leaving deep impressions in the softened ground. The relocated earth was used to build up terraces, smooth transitions between elevations, and create gentle slopes that appeared natural but were meticulously engineered. Beneath these surfaces, drainage channels were installed to prevent water from accumulating behind the retaining walls. The design relied on a series of hidden conduits that redirected rainwater toward lower fields. These channels, often overlooked in historical summaries, were essential. Without them, the newly shaped land would have shifted under the weight of the stone mansion. Stabilizing the terrain involved more than managing water. The soil composition on the hill, primarily clay mixed with chalk, required reinforcement. Engineers employed brick-lined culverts, compacted gravel layers, and in certain areas deep footings that reached down to firmer strata. The foundations of Waddesdon were built not only to support the structure, but to counter the movement of the ground itself. This meant embedding the base of the house in a carefully calibrated mix of materials designed to distribute load evenly. These elements remain hidden, yet they form the silent anchor of the entire estate. As the earthworks progressed, the natural character of the hill began to change. What had once been a rugged landscape used for grazing became a controlled environment with defined contours and engineered viewpoints. Ferdinand's intention was not merely to place a mansion on a hilltop, but to create a setting that complemented the architecture. The approach road illustrates this purpose clearly. The path was rerouted multiple times during construction to enhance the visual reveal of the house. Early versions approached too directly, exposing portions of the unfinished facade before the sequence of views was properly staged. Later revisions introduced curves, strategically placed trees, and graded inclines that controlled sightlines with precision. The effect was to make the house appear gradually, almost ceremonially, as one ascended the hill. The work demanded a large labour force. Reports from the period mention hundreds of men employed simultaneously, including excavators, brickmakers, drain layers, and survey assistants. Many lived in temporary accommodations near the site, rising before dawn to continue the reshaping of the land. Their labour created the physical conditions necessary for the architectural vision to take form, yet despite their central role, they remain largely absent from official accounts. Estate journals occasionally list wages, deliveries, and supply costs, but the workers' names rarely appear. The absence echoes a larger pattern in country house history, where the landscape seems to emerge as a finished product without acknowledgement of the invisible effort it required. Transporting materials to the top of the hill posed another challenge. Heavy stone, timber, and supplies could not simply be hauled up the existing paths. Engineers constructed temporary tracks, some using narrow-gauge rails to move materials efficiently. Horses pulled wagons fitted with reinforced wheels suitable for the uneven terrain. The temporary infrastructure formed a web of movement across the site, intersecting with storage yards and workshops. These logistics were essential to maintaining the pace of construction. Delays caused by weather, ground instability, or transport failures would have jeopardized the schedule, and with it, the delicate coordination between teams working on different parts of the estate. Water posed the greatest obstacle. The elevated position meant that natural sources were insufficient for construction needs. Wells were dug, pumps installed, and tanks positioned strategically to store water for mixing mortar, stabilizing soil, and later supplying the house itself. Records mention experiments with different pump designs, indicating that water supply was an ongoing concern. The hill offered visibility and grandeur, but not practicality. Maintaining an estate at such an elevation required constant management of resources that flatland properties took for granted. By the early 1880s, the basic shape of the hill had been transformed. Terraces framed the future gardens, embankments stabilized the eastern side, and the foundations traced the outline of what would become the mansion. Yet the engineering work remained largely invisible. The estate was designed to appear as though it had always been there, dominating the landscape with effortless authority. The labour, calculations, and constant adjustments were meant to vanish the moment the first visitors arrived. The sculpting of the hill also created the conditions for one of Waddesdon's lesser-known systems, the underground network supporting utilities and transport. Beneath the surface, channels carried water, waste, and sometimes heat between different parts of the estate. These systems evolved over time, but their origins lie in the early earthworks. The decision to bury infrastructure was both practical and symbolic. It preserved the illusion of natural beauty while enabling the estate to function like a small, self-sufficient town. The contrast between what was visible and what was concealed became a defining characteristic of Waddesdon. The reshaping of the landscape set the stage for the mansion, but it also changed the surrounding community. Villagers observed the transformation with a mix of awe and uncertainty. The scale of the project surpassed anything previously attempted in the area. The influx of workers, the movement of materials, and the constant activity on the hillside altered daily rhythms. Local fields were repurposed for timber storage or temporary stables. Paths used for generations were rerouted or closed. The hill's new form was not simply an architectural backdrop. It represented a shift in land use, authority, and hierarchy. Once the land was reshaped, the construction of the visible house could begin. But the story of Waddesdon's landscape engineering is not a mere prelude. It reveals the estate's core truth. Every appearance of natural grace was produced through calculated intervention. Every view was arranged, every slope was managed, and every element of stability relied on systems the public was never meant to see. The construction of Waddesdon's main house drew craftsmen and labourers from across Britain and continental Europe, forming a workforce whose size and specialisation resembled that of an industrial project more than a private residence. What unfolded on the hilltop during the early 1880s was a coordinated effort involving stonemasons, carpenters, plasterers, joiners, decorators, metalworkers, gardeners, engineers, and domestic staff recruited long before the house was completed. Their presence shaped the estate as decisively as any architectural plan. Yet, like the foundations embedded beneath the soil, their work remains largely unacknowledged in official narratives. The scale of construction required teams to operate simultaneously on multiple fronts. While masons worked on the exterior stonework, carpenters prepared timber frames in temporary workshops erected at the base of the hill. These workshops functioned as self-contained hubs, equipped with tools, storage areas, and drying racks for timber cured to withstand seasonal shifts. Deliveries arrived continuously, stone blocks cut to precise measurements, bundles of slate for roofing, iron components designed off-site, and crates of decorative elements commissioned from France. The logistical complexity meant that any delay in material shipments could halt entire sections of the project. Much of the craftsmanship drew from traditions already declining in the late 19th century. The elaborate stone carvings adorning the facade required artisans trained in ornamental masonry, capable of replicating historical motifs with exacting detail. Their work demanded precision. A misaligned carving or improperly cut block could disrupt the visual harmony intended by Destailleur's design. Carvings were produced both on-site and in specialised workshops, where artisans sculpted pieces that were later transported to the hilltop and installed at considerable height. Scaffolding surrounded the growing structure, resembling a lattice that allowed dozens of workers to move vertically and horizontally as required. Inside the house, plasterers applied layers of lime-based plaster, shaping cornices, ceiling medallions, and wall mouldings. Many of these elements were inspired by French examples and required moulds crafted specifically for Waddesdon. The plasterwork served both decorative and structural purposes, concealing seams, providing insulation, and creating surfaces compatible with the tapestries and paintings that Ferdinand planned to install. Painters followed behind, applying base coats, glazes, and finishing layers. Certain rooms demanded pigments mixed according to traditional formulas, ensuring tonal depth that would complement the estate's artwork. Metalworkers constructed railings, locks, hinges, and structural components that, though rarely visible to visitors, were essential to the building's function. The staircase balustrades, for instance, required ironworkers to shape continuous forms capable of carrying substantial weight while appearing visually delicate. Decorative ironwork, sourced partly from French workshops and partly from English firms, had to be integrated seamlessly, despite the differing standards and techniques between regions. Amid this intricate labour, the estate's developing infrastructure introduced another layer of complexity. Engineers coordinated the installation of heating systems, ventilation channels, gas lighting lines, later adapted for electrification, and plumbing. The heating system alone required an array of boilers, ducts and flues routed through walls and floors without disturbing the ornamental designs. The challenge lay in balancing architectural authenticity with modern comfort. A Renaissance-style chateau built in the 19th century needed to satisfy Victorian expectations of warmth, sanitation, and convenience. Achieving that balance demanded collaboration between architects, engineers and craftsmen, each adjusting their work to accommodate the others. The presence of so many workers transformed daily life in the area. Villages such as Waddesdon and Upper Winchenden saw an influx of temporary residents, inns, cottages and makeshift lodgings filled with masons, carpenters and general labourers. Local records mention higher demand for food supplies, cart repairs and livestock to support the transport of heavy materials. The rhythms of construction shaped the local economy, creating opportunities while also straining existing resources. These changes often went unnoticed in estate histories focused on architectural achievement, yet they reveal how profoundly the project altered the region's social fabric. The workforce hierarchy was strictly defined. Master craftsmen directed teams of apprentices and journeymen. Foremen coordinated daily tasks, ensuring that the sequence of operations aligned with the overarching schedule. Engineers reported progress to architectural representatives, who in turn communicated with Ferdinand. The flow of information travelled vertically through this system, with decisions made at the top and executed through layers of supervision. This structure mirrored industrial management models emerging in the same era, reflecting how large estates increasingly resembled complex organisations rather than traditional country houses built by local craftsmen. The physical strain endured by workers was considerable. Stonemasons operated in exposed conditions, shaping and installing blocks regardless of seasonal weather. Carpenters navigated high scaffolds carrying heavy timber components. Plasterers worked long hours in enclosed, dust-filled spaces. The pace of the project required relentless effort, with few periods of rest. Injuries were common, though rarely documented in estate records. The absence of personal accounts highlights how the labour force became part of the estate's invisible machinery, indispensable yet largely forgotten. As the main structure rose, attention shifted to the interiors, where Ferdinand's curatorial vision demanded an unprecedented level of precision. Rooms were designed around specific art pieces, meaning that craftsmen had to adjust panelling, lighting and spacing to match the dimensions of objects that often arrived late in the process. This required adaptability and constant recalibration. The house became an evolving puzzle, with each decorative element influencing decisions in adjacent spaces. The gardens and grounds required their own workforce, separate from the construction teams. Gardeners cleared land, established nurseries and planted thousands of trees chosen to create a cultivated landscape that would mature long after the main house was completed. The scale of planting echoed the engineering ambition seen in the landscape reshaping. Long avenues, carefully framed views and controlled vegetation patterns. The gardener's work laid the foundation for a landscape that appeared effortlessly harmonious, despite being entirely manufactured. By the time the mansion neared completion in the mid-1880s, the workforce had created not just a house but a system, an interconnected environment where architecture, engineering and labour converged to support a singular vision. Yet the final stage of construction revealed a deeper truth about Waddesdon. The visible grandeur depended on an increasingly complex network of hidden mechanisms. Beneath the apparent elegance of Waddesdon, a network of hidden systems sustained the mansion's operations, ensuring that its grandeur functioned with seamless efficiency. The estate was not a mere house, it was a meticulously engineered organism. Every feature, from heating to plumbing, from food distribution to ice storage, operated according to principles rarely disclosed outside estate management records. These systems reveal the level of foresight required to maintain the illusion of effortless wealth. Central to Waddesdon's functionality was its heating system. While visitors saw high ceilings, fireplaces and ornate chimneys, what they did not perceive was the array of boilers, flues and ducting hidden behind walls and beneath floors. The boilers were fueled by coal delivered daily, stored in subterranean bunkers to keep the service areas unobtrusive. Engineers designed the flues to carry heat upward and laterally, using a combination of natural convection and mechanical ventilation. The high ceilings, while visually impressive, presented a challenge. Heat naturally rises, leaving the lower living spaces cold. To counter this, ducts ran through walls and under floors, ensuring temperature consistency without disturbing the aesthetic. It was an invisible infrastructure, one that required continuous monitoring, skilled operators, and a predictable supply of fuel. Water management posed an equally intricate challenge. The hilltop location meant that natural sources were insufficient for the household's extensive needs. Waddesdon relied on wells, cisterns, and elaborate pipe systems to supply drinking water, sanitation, and gardens. Iron pipes, some imported from Europe, extended beneath floors and across terraces. Wastewater followed a separate route, flowing into concealed channels that prevented any odour or contamination from reaching the public areas. For the kitchens, laundry, and bathing facilities, engineers calculated pressure gradients, storage capacity, and peak demand cycles. Every faucet and drain was a product of precise planning. The house could not operate like a standard country home without these systems. The kitchens themselves were hubs of both labour and mechanical sophistication. Large enough to feed dozens of staff and guests simultaneously, they contained multiple ovens, roasting spits, and ice boxes. Food arrived from external suppliers but was then processed, preserved, and transported throughout the house via hidden dumbwaiters, lifts, and corridors. These delivery systems minimised exposure to guests while allowing servants to work efficiently. Ice, a luxury at the time, was stored in subterranean ice houses insulated with straw and stone, ensuring cold supplies throughout the warmer months. The synchronization of these systems demanded managers who understood not only the mechanics, but also the timing of human activity. Chefs, butlers, and runners moved in patterns dictated by both the architecture and the expectations of elite social schedules. Lighting and ventilation were similarly engineered. Gas lighting ran through copper tubing, concealed within walls and ceilings. It was complemented later by electric wiring, retrofitted in a manner that preserved the historical appearance of each room. Ventilation shafts, some disguised as decorative elements, channeled air to prevent dampness, preserve tapestries, and maintain comfortable conditions for both humans and artifacts. Every adjustment reflected an understanding that form and function could not be separated at Waddesdon. Aesthetic decisions shaped operational requirements, and operational necessities influenced architectural details. Even circulation within the house was carefully controlled. The main staircases, grand as they were, served a dual purpose: to display wealth and to guide visitors along prescribed paths. Hidden corridors, service staircases, and staff entrances allowed the workforce to move unobtrusively. Wine cellars, storage areas, and archives were connected by subterranean passages, facilitating transport without disrupting the theatrical presentation of the house. These spaces were constructed with the same attention to detail as visible rooms, though they were meant to remain unseen. Their existence reflects the tension at Waddesdon between display and functionality. Every visible element relied on layers of concealed infrastructure. The gardens, too, were bound to these systems. Greenhouses required constant watering, heating, and ventilation. Soil quality was managed through imported materials and careful layering, allowing exotic plants to thrive in an English climate. Paths and terraces integrated subtle drainage channels, ensuring that rain did not erode surfaces or damage carefully arranged plantings. The maintenance of such grounds required full-time gardeners, assistants, and labourers who coordinated with the household staff to keep the estate in immaculate condition year-round. Collectively, these systems reveal that Waddesdon was less a residence than a controlled environment, a space in which every element, human, mechanical, and architectural, was integrated into a singular operational vision. It was a house that demanded constant attention, precise labour, and continual oversight, yet presented itself as timeless and effortless. The visible grandeur was inseparable from the invisible machinery. To understand one is to recognise the other. The existence of these hidden networks prompts a broader question. How sustainable was a household that depended on such intensive labour, intricate logistics, and constant resource input? While the estate projected continuity and permanence, its internal demands foreshadowed the pressures that would emerge after Ferdinand's death. The systems themselves, so meticulously designed, would later become a burden, revealing the hidden costs behind the apparent elegance. Understanding the invisible backbone of Waddesdon leads naturally to examining the objects that defined its interiors and the networks that acquired them. the story of the collection is inseparable from the story of the house. Waddesdon's interior collections were conceived not merely as decoration, but as instruments of influence, status, and historical continuity. Ferdinand de Rothschild approached acquisition with the precision of a financier and the curiosity of a historian, seeking objects that carried weight both culturally and socially. Every painting, tapestry, porcelain piece, and piece of furniture was chosen to reinforce the mansion's narrative, a story of cultivated taste, refined lineage, and cross-European prestige. Yet these objects also reveal an often overlooked dimension of the estate, the networks, negotiations, and logistics required to make such a collection physically and conceptually coherent. Ferdinand's letters, now preserved in archives, document the painstaking process of identifying and securing art across France, Italy, and England. Shipments arrived in crates, sometimes dozens at a time, each catalogued meticulously, labelled for specific rooms, and accompanied by instructions for handling. Artisans, packers, and transport teams became an invisible workforce, bridging the gap between distant workshops and the hilltop estate. Some objects, particularly tapestries and large canvases, required temporary scaffolding for installation, coordinated with both the physical constraints of the house and the visual choreography envisioned by Ferdinand. The placement of each piece was deliberate, considering sightlines, natural lighting, and the flow of movement through the rooms. The acquisition process also entailed navigating complex social networks. Many items came from private collections whose owners had long histories and reputations in the art world. Negotiations involved not only price, but provenance, authenticity, and occasionally legal documentation. Ferdinand's role was both collector and intermediary, positioning Waddesdon as a cultural hub while maintaining discretion in a competitive European market. The network extended further. Agents in Paris, London, and Vienna scouted, bid, and arranged transport on his behalf. This web of intermediaries illustrates that Waddesdon's grandeur was supported not just by wealth, but by intelligence, relationships, and constant management. Once delivered, objects required careful integration into the house. Carpentry, masonry, and lighting had to accommodate irregular shapes and sizes, while the environmental systems already installed, heating, humidity control, and airflow, protected sensitive materials. Some rooms were constructed with specific collections in mind, their dimensions dictated by the largest tapestry or the scale of a particular cabinet. In effect, the architecture of Waddesdon and its contents co-evolved. One could not exist without the other. This integration highlights a subtle tension between permanence and impermanence. Objects were meant to signify lasting culture, yet their installation and preservation relied on constant labour, monitoring, and adjustment. The collections also functioned as instruments of social signalling. Hosting royalty, diplomats, and industrial magnates was part of a strategy to assert influence and cultivate networks. Rooms were curated to impress visitors subtly. The choice of objects, their arrangement, and the sequence in which they were encountered conveyed messages about taste, erudition, and wealth. It was not ostentation for its own sake, it was a controlled performance. Guests might notice the sparkle of a chandelier or the intricacy of a tapestry, but the underlying infrastructure, the scaffolding, the careful environmental control, the hidden corridors through which staff moved, remained invisible. The collection's power depended on that invisibility. Transporting and maintaining the collection was itself a logistical achievement. Furniture, porcelain, and works on paper were susceptible to damage from vibration, moisture, and light. Daily routines included inspection, dusting, repositioning, and minor repairs. The presence of specialized conservators or skilled staff capable of addressing these needs was essential. In effect, the collection imposed operational requirements that shaped the day-to-day functioning of the house. Every object added a layer of complexity to an already intricate system of heating, water, and human movement. This attention to detail extended into the gardens, which functioned as a living complement to the interior collections. Exotic plants, imported soil, and greenhouse operations mirrored the curated nature of the house itself. The gardens became another dimension of Waddesdon's narrative, a controlled demonstration of human skill over nature, carefully choreographed to enhance the visual and symbolic impact of the mansion. Gardeners, horticulturists, and labourers worked continuously to maintain symmetry, bloom cycles and vistas that aligned with architectural lines. Their labour was intensive and ongoing, reinforcing the estate's dual identity as both residence and museum of wealth. The acquisition and display of art at Waddesdon reveal a pattern repeated throughout the estate. Every outward sign of ease and beauty depended on unseen networks, sustained labour, and complex systems. The house and its collections created an impression of timeless stability, yet this stability was carefully constructed, fragile in its dependence on continual oversight. The visible elegance masked a hidden reality. Maintaining such a narrative required extraordinary resources, foresight and management, from the shipment of crates across Europe to the daily movement of staff within hidden corridors. The significance of Waddesdon's collections lies not only in their aesthetic or monetary value, but in what they reveal about the estate as a system. They demonstrate how culture, labour, architecture and logistics intertwined to create an environment that functioned simultaneously as home, museum and stage. The art became a lens through which the underlying machinery of the estate can be understood. Yet the presence of these objects also hints at deeper pressures, the financial and social burdens that accompanied the pursuit of perfection. The gardens at Waddesdon Manor were more than decorative accompaniments. They were extensions of the architectural and social vision that Ferdinand de Rothschild pursued within the house. From the earliest stages of design, the grounds were conceived as a controlled environment, shaped with precision to convey refinement, order, and continuity. Yet achieving this appearance required interventions that were labour-intensive, technologically demanding, and logistically complex, revealing the hidden costs behind the estate's cultivated beauty. Creating the formal gardens involved manipulating the terrain already reshaped during the earthworks phase. Terraces were levelled with exacting care to support flower beds, lawns, and walkways. Engineers installed concealed drainage channels to prevent waterlogging and erosion, while soil quality was carefully managed. In some cases, topsoil was imported from distant regions to provide the right composition for exotic plants. The sheer scale of these operations is evident in estate records, which detail the movement of thousands of cubic meters of earth, the construction of retaining walls, and the installation of irrigation systems, much of it invisible to the casual observer. Plant selection reflected both aesthetic ambition and logistical calculation. Ferdinand sought to cultivate a range of species that could thrive in England yet evoke continental sophistication. This included rare trees, shrubs, and perennials, many imported from France, Germany, and the Netherlands. Each plant required precise conditions for survival, prompting the construction of greenhouses and cold frames. These structures were equipped with coal-fired heating systems, ventilation shafts, and specialised watering mechanisms. Maintaining the plants demanded constant attention from a dedicated team of gardeners and assistants who monitored growth, trimmed, replanted, and adjusted soil composition to ensure each species flourished in its assigned location. Paths, avenues, and sightlines were engineered to create carefully orchestrated views, framing the mansion, fountains, and distant landscape features in deliberate sequences. The arrangement was intended to guide visitors visually and experientially, offering a sense of progression and discovery. In practice, achieving these effects required coordination between surveyors, landscape architects, and horticultural staff. Trees and hedges were planted at calculated intervals, soil was graded to precise specifications, and terraces were aligned with architectural axes. The result is a garden that appears effortless, but rests on years of planning and continuous maintenance. The water systems supporting the gardens were particularly complex. Waddesdon's water supply had to serve fountains, ponds, irrigation and greenhouse operations, all while relying on a hilltop position with limited natural sources. Engineers designed cisterns, pumps and concealed piping networks that could channel water efficiently to different parts of the grounds. Ice harvested during winter months was stored underground to cool certain plants and preserve perishables during warmer seasons. These mechanisms required regular oversight, repairs, and coordination with staff managing the interior operations of the house. The garden was inseparable from the broader estate infrastructure. It functioned as a living display that relied on mechanical and human systems alike. Labour in the gardens reflected a hierarchy similar to that within the house. Head gardeners supervised teams responsible for specific areas: parterres, hedgerows, greenhouse interiors, while general labourers undertook manual tasks such as planting, pruning and soil preparation. Work was dictated by seasonal cycles, with intense periods of planting in spring and maintenance in summer, alongside careful management of water and soil during wetter months. Estate accounts indicate that dozens of labourers were employed full-time, and many more during peak seasons. Their efforts were essential to sustaining the illusion of natural beauty and continuity that visitors took for granted. The gardens also carried symbolic weight. They reinforced Waddesdon's function as a site of social and political performance, extending the curated narrative of the house into the landscape. Guests traversed carefully maintained avenues, stopping at viewpoints designed to frame the mansion against the surrounding countryside. Flower beds and sculptural elements echoed motifs inside the house, creating thematic continuity between interior and exterior spaces. Every visual impression was orchestrated, every path and planting a component of the larger narrative. Yet beneath this cultivated surface lay the strain of maintaining such an environment. Exotic plants were vulnerable to climate, pests and disease. Fountains and irrigation systems required constant upkeep. Labourers contended with seasonal extremes while ensuring precision and order. The energy, expertise, and resources necessary to sustain the gardens reveal the hidden machinery that underpins the estate's grandeur. What appears as leisure, natural growth, and aesthetic harmony is inseparable from intensive human and technical intervention. The contrast between beauty and effort in Waddesdon's gardens mirrors a recurring theme across the estate. The visible elegance always conceals underlying complexity, labour and cost. Each terrace, flower bed and greenhouse exemplifies the broader pattern of controlled perfection found throughout the house and grounds. The gardens, in their combination of botanical ambition and logistical sophistication, offer a lens into the estate's operational reality, highlighting the scale and precision required to sustain what the public perceived as effortless grandeur. The financial dimension of Waddesdon Manor underscores a quiet tension that runs through the entire estate, the gap between visible opulence and underlying cost. While the Rothschild name suggested unlimited resources, the reality of sustaining a house of this scale demanded careful calculation, ongoing investment, and an understanding of how expenditures multiplied across labour, materials, and maintenance. Records from the period reveal that construction costs alone far exceeded initial projections, with specialised artisans, imported stone, and bespoke interiors driving the budget higher than anticipated. Each decision, whether to commission a French tapestry, import rare timber, or extend a greenhouse, carried both immediate and long-term financial consequences. Ferdinand approached these costs with a dual mindset, that of a collector intent on achieving aesthetic and cultural perfection, and that of a banker accustomed to precise accounting. Estate ledgers track payments to hundreds of individual craftsmen, daily wages for labourers, transportation of materials across Europe, and recurring costs for coal, water and maintenance. Even small operational items such as the replacement of broken tiles or the repair of heating ducts were documented meticulously. The sheer scale of the bookkeeping highlights a principle rarely noted by casual observers. A house like Waddesdon was never simply built, it was continuously constructed through a chain of financial and administrative acts. Beyond construction, ongoing costs posed a sustained burden. Staffing levels remained extraordinarily high to manage both visible and invisible operations. Housekeepers, valets, chefs and gardeners worked alongside engineers, stonemasons and specialised conservators, creating a payroll that extended indefinitely. Seasonal adjustments, additional gardeners in spring, temporary labour for harvests or greenhouse maintenance, added further complexity. Correspondence between estate managers indicates that even minor budget overruns could ripple across departments, necessitating adjustments in procurement, labour allocation, or project pacing. Supply chains compounded these pressures. Materials for Waddesdon were often sourced internationally, reflecting Ferdinand's commitment to authenticity. Slate, stone, and timber arrived from quarries across Europe. Rare plants came from continental nurseries. Artisans travelled from France, Italy, and Germany to execute intricate designs. Transport costs were considerable, as goods moved by rail, horse-drawn cart, and occasionally by river. Delays or damage could trigger additional expenditures, requiring replacements or repairs that added to the estate's financial burden. Every object, whether a work of art or a structural component, carried embedded costs beyond its purchase price, encompassing logistics, labour and risk. The gardens and infrastructure introduced ongoing operational expenses that were equally significant. Greenhouses consumed coal, gardeners required tools and fertiliser, and complex drainage and heating systems demanded regular inspections and repairs. Even water management incurred costs, from pumping systems to storage tanks and maintenance of pipes concealed beneath terraces and floors. The estate functioned as a self-contained ecosystem, each component dependent on continuous input of both labour and capital. Waddesdon's grandeur, then, was inseparable from a hidden ledger of sustained investment. Financial pressures were not simply technical, they were also social and symbolic. Maintaining the house and its collections signalled prestige, cultural authority and continuity, which were central to Ferdinand's identity and that of the Rothschild family more broadly. Public display, visits from royalty and hosting of social and political figures demanded that the estate operate flawlessly. Failure to sustain appearances could undermine carefully constructed narratives of taste, refinement and influence. In this sense, financial diligence was both practical and performative. The cost of the estate was inseparable from the image it projected. The long-term implications of these expenditures became evident after Ferdinand's death. The systems, labour and collections he had built required ongoing management by successors. Estate records show that later generations had to reconcile the desire to preserve the house with the realities of inflation, changing labour markets and evolving technology. Some items were sold, others relocated, and the infrastructure itself gradually adapted to new demands, including electrification and modern plumbing. Yet throughout these changes, the underlying pattern remained. Visible splendour depended on hidden costs, complex coordination, and meticulous oversight. The financial dimension of Waddesdon invites reflection on a broader historical question. How do estates balance the pursuit of prestige with practical sustainability? Ferdinand's vision demonstrates that beauty, culture, and influence come at a quantifiable cost, one that reaches into labour, logistics, and ongoing maintenance. Every stone, every artefact, every terrace carries both an immediate price and a continuing obligation, revealing that the estate's grandeur is inseparable from the invisible machinery required to sustain it. The domestic staff at Waddesdon Manor formed the backbone of the estate, a human network whose skill and discipline ensured that the Rothschild vision was realised day after day. Unlike the visible craftsmen who constructed the house or the gardeners who sculpted the grounds, these individuals were largely unseen, moving through hidden corridors, service staircases, and subterranean passages. Their work was continuous, structured, and highly specialised, reflecting the complexity of the house itself. Staffing records from the 1880s indicate that Waddesdon employed dozens of permanent household servants, with numbers swelling during peak social seasons. The hierarchy was strictly maintained. Housekeepers supervised female staff, including maids, laundresses, and kitchen assistants. Butlers and valets coordinated male servants, including footmen, doormen, and personal attendants. Each position had defined responsibilities, often tied to specific rooms, floors, or functions. For instance, certain maids were responsible exclusively for maintaining tapestries and upholstery, while others oversaw the rotation and care of silver and porcelain. The precision of these assignments reveals the degree to which labour was organised as part of a larger operational system. Coordination of movement within the house was critical. Staff followed carefully choreographed routes designed to minimise exposure to guests. Service corridors connected kitchens, pantries, and storage areas to main reception rooms, allowing meals, supplies, and information to move efficiently without interrupting social activities. Dumbwaiters, lifts, and hidden staircases facilitated vertical movement, enabling the transportation of heavy or fragile items without relying on visible staircases. The design of these pathways reflects an understanding that function had to be seamlessly integrated with aesthetics. The house could not operate smoothly if labour interfered with the intended visual and social experience. The daily rhythm of work was dictated by both domestic schedules and the social calendar. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner required precise timing. Kitchens had to prepare meals according to the expected number of guests, while dining rooms needed to be set, cleaned, and reset with exacting attention to detail. Gardens and grounds required early morning maintenance before visitors arrived, while cleaning, dusting, and minor repairs occurred throughout the day. Estate diaries reveal a continual cycle of tasks that left little room for error. The staff's labour was relentless, coordinated, and integral to the manor's presentation of order and refinement. Beyond routine duties, staff were responsible for preserving both the collections and the physical environment. Paintings, tapestries, and furniture required specialised care, dusting, inspection, and where necessary, minor repairs or adjustments. Environmental controls, from temperature regulation to airflow, were monitored indirectly by domestic staff, who ensured that windows were positioned correctly, ventilation shafts remained clear, and fireplaces or heating systems operated as intended. In essence, staff acted as the living interface between the hidden machinery of the house and its visible splendour. Training and knowledge transfer were crucial to maintaining standards. Experienced servants instructed apprentices, creating continuity across generations. Many household practices were codified in manuals or estate notes, reflecting the Rothschild commitment to consistency and precision. Staff were expected to anticipate needs, execute tasks with discretion, and adapt to changing circumstances without compromising the operation of the house. The social discipline required mirrored that of industrial or military organisations, though it was conducted in a domestic context and under constant scrutiny from the family and visiting guests. The workforce also mediated the interface between the house and external suppliers, contractors and visitors. Deliveries of coal, food, artwork and building materials were coordinated through staff to maintain efficiency and conceal operational complexity. Special events required temporary expansion of the workforce, including extra kitchen hands, footmen, and housekeeping assistants. Staff records document a fluid system in which permanent and temporary personnel interacted seamlessly, a testament to managerial oversight and structured training. Despite the structured hierarchy and careful orchestration, labour was not without strain. Long hours, seasonal peaks, and the physical demands of moving heavy objects, tending gardens, or maintaining complex mechanical systems tested endurance. Historical correspondence occasionally references minor injuries, illness, and fatigue, though such details were rarely documented in public accounts. The invisibility of the staff masks the essential nature of their contribution. Without this human network, the elaborate systems, collections, and grounds would have faltered. The domestic organisation at Waddesdon underscores a central theme of the estate. Every visible element, artwork, architectural detail, or landscape terrace, relied on layers of hidden labour. The household functioned as a precisely coordinated system, where human effort, infrastructure, and material resources converged to maintain an image of permanence, taste, and effortless beauty. Observing the operation of this workforce provides insight not only into the functioning of Waddesdon, but also into the broader social and technological networks that underpinned elite country estates in the late 19th century. Security at Waddesdon Manor extended far beyond the presence of guards or gates. The estate was designed to protect both tangible and intangible assets, priceless artworks, rare furnishings, and sensitive correspondence, as well as the carefully curated social image of the Rothschild family. Archival plans and estate inventories reveal a multi-layered approach that combined physical barriers, procedural safeguards, and technological innovations, all integrated into the daily rhythm of the household. Physical security began at the perimeter. Waddesdon's hilltop location offered natural oversight of the surrounding landscape, but it was complemented by carefully planned fencing, gates, and controlled access points. Visitors were funneled along specific roads and paths, allowing estate staff to monitor arrivals while maintaining the impression of openness. Hidden posterns and service entrances enabled discreet movement of staff and deliveries, ensuring that unauthorised access could be detected or circumvented without disrupting the visual presentation of the grounds. Even the design of terraces and garden layouts contributed. Clear sightlines allowed sentries and gardeners to spot intrusions or unusual activity from multiple vantage points. Inside the house, security relied on layers of structural and procedural measures. Many rooms containing valuable collections were reinforced subtly, with locks and bolts integrated into doors and cabinetry. Vaults and safes, constructed from iron and reinforced wood, protected documents, jewellery, and financial records. Servants and staff were trained to follow strict protocols regarding access. Keys were accounted for, doors remained closed when not in use, and sensitive areas were supervised continuously. Estate correspondence emphasises that discipline and vigilance were as crucial as mechanical protections. The presence of trustworthy staff created a human network of surveillance that worked in tandem with physical measures. Fire prevention was another critical aspect of security, often overlooked in traditional accounts. The house contained extensive wooden structures, decorative fabrics, and combustible materials, all requiring protection. Fire breaks, strategically placed doors, and early detection systems were integrated into the architecture. Servants were instructed in emergency procedures, including the movement of valuable objects, the operation of pumps and hoses, and the isolation of flammable supplies. Records show that even minor incidents, a spark from a fireplace or an overheated kitchen stove, triggered immediate responses, highlighting the constant tension between domestic operation and risk management. Technological innovations further reinforced security. Gaslighting, while primarily a functional improvement, was installed in a manner that minimized fire hazards and allowed for discreet monitoring. Concealed wiring and ventilation channels reduced exposure to accidental damage. In certain areas, bell systems enabled rapid communication between floors and wings, allowing staff to respond to emergencies or unexpected situations without disrupting the household's routines. These systems were integrated into the design from the outset, reflecting foresight and a holistic understanding of the estate's operational needs. Security extended to the management of objects themselves. Cataloguing, registration, and tracking were meticulously maintained, particularly for high-value items transported from abroad or moved within the house. Artworks, tapestries, and furniture were assigned designated locations, and any relocation required recorded authorization. This procedural rigor ensured accountability and minimized the risk of misplacement or damage, reinforcing the broader pattern observed across Waddesdon. The estate's grandeur depended on invisible systems, both human and mechanical, operating with continuous oversight. The combined effect of these measures was a house that could operate safely and efficiently while maintaining the illusion of effortless elegance. Guests perceived uninterrupted beauty and order, unaware of the network of precautions, procedures, and constant attention sustaining the environment. Yet these measures also reveal the hidden labour, ingenuity, and forethought required to protect both the material and symbolic assets of the estate. Security was inseparable from the broader architecture of function. Every corridor, door, and room reflected consideration of access, surveillance, and control. This integration of security, preservation, and daily operation highlights a central truth about Waddesdon Manor. Its survival relied on the convergence of multiple, often invisible systems. Each layer, structural, technological, procedural, and human, reinforced the others, creating resilience that supported both the family's lifestyle and the longevity of the collections. The house was not merely inhabited, it was actively maintained, monitored, and managed, in ways that remain largely hidden from public view. Modernisation at Waddesdon Manor unfolded gradually, shaped by technological innovation, social transformation, and the pressures of sustaining a vast estate in the face of changing times. The turn of the 20th century introduced electricity, mechanised heating, and new communication systems, each of which required careful integration into a structure conceived for an earlier era. The challenge was to modernise without disrupting the house's aesthetic cohesion or the functional patterns established by Ferdinand de Rothschild decades earlier. Archival correspondence, engineering diagrams, and invoices reveal the deliberate and sometimes painstaking processes undertaken to achieve this balance. Electricity was introduced initially in select areas, primarily service corridors and kitchens, before being extended to public rooms. Wiring had to be concealed within walls, ceilings, and floors already dense with coal flues, gas piping, and ventilation shafts. Electric lighting supplemented rather than replaced gas lamps, preserving the visual effect while enhancing safety and convenience. Installation required not only engineers and electricians, but also skilled carpenters and plasterers, tasked with maintaining decorative finishes and structural integrity. The process illustrates a recurring theme at Waddesdon. Visible improvement depended entirely on invisible labour and careful planning. Heating systems also evolved. Coal-fired boilers, while effective, demanded constant attention and a steady supply of fuel. Steam circulation was improved to reach previously colder areas, and new ducting and radiators were installed in ways that minimised aesthetic disruption. Technicians had to navigate complex, multi-storey layouts, retrofitting mechanical systems around delicate woodwork, tapestries, and artworks. Each intervention required precise calculations. Pressure gradients, thermal expansion, and fuel efficiency were balanced against the structural and decorative limitations of the house. Even minor miscalculations risked damage to either fabric or function. Communication systems were another focus. Bell pulls, telephones, and later intercoms were incorporated to maintain coordination among staff dispersed across multiple floors, wings, and gardens. These systems allowed faster response to emergencies, improved service efficiency, and reduced the likelihood of operational errors, but they also had to be discreet. Guests were never to witness the infrastructure that kept the estate functioning seamlessly. The expansion of these networks underscores how technological progress at Waddesdon was always mediated by concerns for appearance, tradition, and the smooth orchestration of labour. Social and economic changes also shaped modernisation. Labour practices shifted as domestic service evolved in England, and new regulations influenced working hours, pay, and training. Estate managers adapted by reorganising staff hierarchies, introducing specialised training, and adjusting schedules to accommodate evolving norms. Similarly, the influx of new technologies allowed some labour-intensive tasks to be mechanised, reducing the burden on staff while preserving operational efficiency. Yet these changes introduced new dependencies. Machinery required maintenance, skilled operators, and continual oversight. Modernisation brought both relief and complexity, reflecting a continual negotiation between innovation and tradition. Even aesthetic considerations influenced technological choices. Light fixtures, heating vents, and mechanical equipment had to complement the house's stylistic coherence. Architects and engineers worked closely with interior designers and curators, ensuring that updates did not disrupt visual harmony. In many cases, this meant designing custom solutions, whether bespoke radiators, concealed conduits, or decorative coverings for mechanical components. The integration of modern systems thus became a form of artistry, requiring coordination across disciplines, blending technical expertise with aesthetic judgment. The gardens and grounds were also affected by modernisation. Irrigation systems, greenhouse heating, and pathways were upgraded with new materials and pumps, often powered mechanically rather than manually. These changes improved efficiency, but demanded careful supervision to prevent damage to plants and infrastructure. The introduction of mechanised tools altered labour patterns, reducing the hours required for routine maintenance, while introducing new training requirements. Once again, the estate exemplified the interplay between visible beauty and invisible operational complexity. In sum, modernisation at Waddesdon Manor was not a singular event but a layered process, one that respected historical integrity while embracing technological and social evolution. Every intervention, from electrification to heating improvements, from communication networks to mechanised garden tools, required meticulous planning and integration. The estate remained functional, elegant, and impressive, but only because a deep network of hidden systems, mechanical, procedural, and human, was continually adapted to meet changing needs. Ultimately, the story of Waddesdon Manor is one of intricate balance between beauty and labour, display and function, permanence and impermanence. Every stone, tapestry, and garden terrace reflects a deliberate orchestration of human skill, material resources, and technological ingenuity. What visitors experienced as effortless grandeur was the result of layers upon layers of planning, coordination, and maintenance, stretching from the construction phase through decades of adaptation and modernisation. The house operated as a complex system, where architecture, collections, gardens, labour, infrastructure, and finances were intertwined, each element dependent on the others for survival. The enduring legacy of Waddesdon lies not only in its aesthetic achievements, but in the way it exemplifies the hidden labour that sustained elite estates. The meticulous planning of heating and water systems, the invisible circulation of staff, the careful integration of art and furnishings, the complex management of gardens, and the rigorous financial oversight all reveal the cost of constructing and maintaining an environment of controlled perfection. Behind every public display of taste and refinement was a network of unseen effort, the quiet machinery of an estate that demanded constant attention and expertise. Yet even with careful planning and resources, Waddesdon was never entirely immune to the pressures of time. Social changes, labour shifts, technological advances, and financial constraints required continual adaptation. Objects aged, systems required repair, and staff needed training to navigate new technologies. Modernization preserved function, but also introduced new dependencies, illustrating the fragility inherent in sustaining such a vast and complex enterprise. The visible elegance remained, but only because the underlying systems evolved alongside it, continuously and invisibly. In reflecting on Waddesdon Manor, one is confronted with a broader historical observation. Great houses are as much about the unseen as the seen. Their majesty and cultural authority are inseparable from the human, mechanical, and logistical networks that sustain them. The Rothschilds' vision, executed with meticulous care by Ferdinand and maintained by generations that followed, offers a lens into the intricate relationship between wealth, culture, and labour in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And yet the question remains quietly: how many such estates, despite their apparent permanence, eventually succumb to the hidden pressures they conceal? Waddesdon endures, but its survival depends on ongoing vigilance, reminding us that grandeur is always provisional, held in place by the unseen hands that maintain it, the hidden systems that support it, and the continuous negotiation between vision and reality. The house, for all its splendour, is a testament to the labour, foresight, and infrastructure that remain invisible to the casual eye, a quiet archive of human endeavour and ambition, closing its doors on the world outside.